let's talk next about housing supply, which is always a key conversation for you and I at the Real Estate Investment Network, as well as with any investor we're speaking to. And that's because at the end of the day, especially in Canada, this is what drives most things that happens in housing. And this is actually the housing supply and the lack thereof, which we'll speak to in a second, is actually what has created this massive floor on the real estate prices, which everyone is kind of starting to feel like, okay, prices did come down off their peak, but they hit a floor. They will not continue to go lower. That's because we just don't have a whole lot of housing, enough housing. We know that. You and I have said that from stage many, many, many times. And when you combine this lack of housing supply with this crazy population growth we've been having, there's no, the market will continue to go in the natural direction it wants to go, which is we have a supply crunch and a big demand on the other side called population. And that typically over time brings prices up. There's no doubt about it. It's just right now we've been artificially keeping prices down with interest rates, but that is going to eventually stop, in my opinion.
Remember, like, share, subscribe, put it in the comments what you like about the show, even what you don't like about the show. Let us know. Let's get those algorithms going. Well, there's so many arguments around all of this and so much controversy around the topic of supply and demand, and there's more than enough supply and demand isn't what it is. And, there's so much controversy around it, but we have to look at what we see right now. And ultimately, we don't see enough supply. People aren't selling their house because they don't want to go into the interest rate. Who would have thought, that at the time, in anticipation of people just going,
no, I can't sell even though I want to because I can't afford or I can't justify the increase in cost.
Number one, of the house that I have to buy, but number two, the cost of carrying that house. You actually aren't even able to, in a middle class mentality, in a retail front facing mentality, you want to upgrade. Most people want to upgrade unless they're being transferred or they're shifting jobs, etc. But ultimately they can't. So in other words, because of the cost of interest rates or the cost of a mortgage payment, they can't buy a $2 million home. So they're not upgrading anymore. So they're buying for the same mortgage payment, they're going to buy a less house than they actually own today. So it's really messed up the whole market, which goes back, and we're going to do a show on it, which is there is a strong thesis around if interest rates go down, JG, guess what? Supply picks up, the competitiveness in the supply, because all of a sudden there's more housing available. House prices actually come down based on rates going down. We're going to do a show on that, and it's really fascinating in that concept and that theory of how that works. And by the way, it's proven out over a number of countries over the years. Interest rates come down, so do housing prices because of the shift of supply. How's that?
Now, that is interesting. I can't wait to do that show because I'm not convinced yet. And now you're still trying to convince me of this. We'll see. I got to see the stats. I got to see the data. We'll see how that goes. But what's fascinating here, and for people listening, there's really multiple factors happening at the same time here, which is by the Bank of Canada increasing interest rates as high as they did, as fast as they have. It has done, yes, there's no doubt the price of real estate has come down from its highs. There's no doubt about that. It definitely impacted that for sure, 100%. But it also had a couple other impacts, Patrick. And the first thing is that a lot of projects have been put on hold. A lot of building projects have been paused, canceled, and that only hurts future housing supply. So the housing supply crunch we were in, because you and I have showed a lot of data over the years, we were in a housing supply crunch. We are now even worse than we've ever been from a housing supply crunch. And this is just one data point, one chart showing that. I mean, look at the deficit here. It's literally just about off the charts. We had to make the chart bigger to accommodate how off the charts we are now in terms of housing supply deficit.
100%. And we have to look at, number one, I'm going to keep always going back. We have to look regionally. So for investors, you have to look at regionally what's happening, number one. Number two, you have to consider property types. So right now, when you look at what's happening in Toronto / the GTA, we see a little bit of a spike in the number of condos on the market. But to your point, builders, developers have quit. So then what's going to happen is that lag is going to catch up, and there's going to be a future shortage of those condo market within that condo market. And so it's interesting to kind of break things down. What people aren't taking into consideration is the lag effect. And we're also, and this is one of the reasons that I'm suggesting that we're going to see an uptick in unemployment, because these developers, builders have quit. They've tapped the brake, which means within the construction industry, things are slowing down. We've talked about that. You're seeing it in your own business where you're starting to see the availability of labor because people aren't as busy. Guys want to get to work. They need to get back to work, and things have slowed down. So the demand of that labor isn't as high as it was. All to say that, again, supply is an issue. It's going to continue to be an issue. And it's interesting when people tap the brake, developers, it just gets worse.
But interestingly, for real estate investors, if you're watching this, think about this is not a bad thing for you, by the way. This is the way I've always seen this, Patrick, and I've known this narrative since the day I began investing in real estate. I view this as my insurance policy. You know, Warren Buffett often says that you need to invest in a business that has a really strong competitive moat. This, in my opinion, is our competitive moat as investors. It just makes they're constantly making it more difficult to get into real estate. The housing supply is going down, not up. The incoming number of people, we have a great chart here on population growth, is going up, not down. And when you have a market where you have a strong competitive moat, it's difficult to get into. It's more difficult than it's ever been to get into real estate. And you have this a period where now supply is going down, demand, i.e., population's going up. That's nothing but a good environment for real estate investors. Given that right now a lot of people don't feel that way, this is just creating this slingshot effect I've been speaking about for the last year, and it's being artificially suppressed because of interest rates. That will, and I think that's the next challenge of the Bank of Canada. They know that's their challenge, which is they're going to try to unload that slingshot without having a massive boom again in the real estate market. That's what I think is really happening here.
Yeah, it's interesting that with all of this, I quite frankly, I see it all as quite fascinating. But this goes back to, I hate to use the term, but it's a little bit of a real estate great reset. It wasn't that long ago that
Did you
everybody
just
was.
really say that? Did you just really use those words?
I did.
Oh,
But it
gosh.
goes back to a fundamental, JG. And this is, for the RAIN community, for those who remain educated, a little bit more sophisticated in their real estate investing strategies and how they view real estate, it is harder work. Not everybody's a real estate, genius right now. It was only a couple of years ago that everybody was a genius. Everybody was investing in real estate. And what has it done is it's kind of taken out all of the those individuals who weren't ready to actually play the game, treat it like a business rather than just, okay, I'm going to throw some money into the pot, see how it all turns out. Those individuals right now are fighting fires because they were buying the wrong property, the wrong pre-construction deal. They were just looking at it going, real estate only goes up. Look how smart I am. For the more sophisticated investors within, let's say, the RAIN community, you were following strategies. You were actually treating it like a business, and you weren't making some of those fundamental mistakes that new investors who thought they were geniuses, who didn't have the education, who weren't looking at the data, were making emotional decisions. That kind of cleaned up that group of individuals. So I think right now, as we get into it as investors, this is where some opportunity continues to live if you've got the education and you're in the right community, like RAIN.
Yeah, absolutely. No doubt about it. And the output, just so everybody knows, the output of high supply, low supply, high population, lots of demand, and the difficult interest rate environment we're in, the output of that every single time this will happen, Patrick, is rising rents. And my gosh, rents have been on an absolute tear across the country, in some places more than others, but they really have gone up. In 2022, they went up significantly. In 2023, they went up across the board, just about across the board, other than Ottawa, across the board. They went up more in 2023 than they did in 2022. And you can see this just continues. And even if you go back, and this is a GTA chart here of rent growth all the way back to 2014, you can see 2023, the biggest growth year on record, 8.7% across, and vacancy has done the exact opposite. Naturally, vacancy is negatively correlated, and vacancy has just fallen off an absolute cliff everywhere. And in fact, in many markets now, we are sub 1%, like Vancouver, 0.9%. But just about across the entire country, Patrick, you're sub 2% in terms of vacancy, which all of this is great for real estate investors. It means you have a lineup of people called your clients looking to rent your product called your apartment. And all of this is good things for real estate investors.
Well, again, what are we trying to do? We're trying to stay ahead of inflation. There's a strong argument, for ongoing inflation. Some would even say there's going to be a hyperinflation, period of time. So all of that aside, what are we trying to do? Put our capital to work to stay ahead of inflation. Everything that we're showing here when it comes to real estate, increasing rents, ultimately speaks to what? The growth in real estate because of inflation. It just goes forward at the rate of inflation or ahead of the rate of inflation. JG, we've been talking about this, I mean, certainly pre-pandemic, but since the pandemic, this was not rocket science. You could see how rents were going to increase, how they had to increase, and we've been talking a lot about that. Did we shake out all of the less sophisticated investors right now? Yeah, because interest rates are higher. It's tougher to get a mortgage. Banks are more, discretionary in terms of who they're lending to and how they're lending. But ultimately, the game stays the same. Keep investing, keep putting your capital to work, and you'll do well.
And the headlines are just, and by the way, folks, you're going to see a lot of headlines about rents going forward. I think this is going to become a critical element. The closer, I believe, Patrick, the closer we get to the election, and the Canadian election, not the US election, but the closer we get to that, and we're getting closer and closer. It's not close enough in my opinion, but anyways, that's beyond that. Is as we get closer, you're going to start to see more and more headlines about rents, more and more headlines about home ownership, and it is going to become an absolute, it's going to be one of the largest election issues, I think, of the next election.
Yeah, and the Liberal government is making some moves in behind the scene right now, as is some provinces. So we're starting to see that happen. I mean, it's too little, too late, but they'll do what they do. If you like what you learned here, go to the description below and subscribe for our free Insiders newsletter, where you can also stay up to date for our upcoming events and our courses.
If you want to see more stuff like this, click here. If you want to see the entire show, click there.